hello and welcome. Today we have a very special guest for you today joining us from Houston Chronicle Live. And of course, we have Joy Sewing, always a great, personality, guest, voice to have on our live event series. If you're joining us for the first time today, or even second time, third time, whatever, please let us know where you are tuning in from. I always love seeing which neighborhood in Houston we're having you join us from, or if you're outside of Houston, where in Texas, across the US. And also just given the subject today, like why you're interested in tuning in. Do you have a young reader in your life? Are you a parent, an educator, a grandparent? Would just love to see, why you're tuning in today and why we have the pleasure of your company. All right, Sharpstown, Humble. Oh, Utah. All right.
Utah,
In
wow.
New Jersey, moving to Houston soon. Katie, wow, Seattle.
Wow.
17-month-old twins. Oh my goodness. Good luck to you.
Sure.
We have a reader joining who is a parent of a 4-year-old, and I'm in the same boat. I have a 4-year-old as well, which is why I'm such a big fan. All right. Some really great out-of-state guests, it seems. Welcome.
Love it. Out of state. And it's
Yeah, and I'm seeing a lot of parents of preschoolers, it seems, older toddlers, maybe preschoolers, which is really cool to see. We'll give everyone about 1 more minute to join.
I'm excited to talk to Spencer again, too. I felt like I learned so much during our interview.
Exciting to be here. I might have brought in some of the folks from out of state.
We love that.
I know, that's great. Oh, that's fantastic. Proud grandma of 2 sons learning to read. That's wonderful.
A lot of grandparents in here. That's great.
All right. It is almost time, and now we're 3 minutes after the hour. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to our news columnist, Joy Sewing. Joy, take it away.
Well, welcome, everyone. I am so happy to be here to talk with Spencer Russell, who I had met in the last couple of weeks. I had been following him, like many of you, on TikTok and Instagram, and following his videos, and he gleaned some of his wisdom in helping my own children with their reading skills. And so we are going to just kind of dive in to talk with Spencer about his journey, and then hopefully he can impart some of his wonderful wisdom on parents like us and grandparents in helping our children to read. So welcome, Spencer.
Thank you for having me here. Excited.
Okay, so what I was really excited to find out when I saw that you had over 1 million followers on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, and that you are local. You're here in Houston. I had no idea.
That's right. I've been in Houston since 2012.
Tell us a little bit about your background. You're from the Northeast, and how you got to education and being passionate about teaching young children.
Of course, I did not start as passionate about teaching young children. I started as a college graduate who didn't know what to do. And so I joined Teach for America, which is a teaching program that put me in Houston, teaching kindergarten at a charter school here. And it took a couple years of actually teaching and doing the work to begin to find my passion, but it turns out it was a great fit. So I spent 6 years teaching kindergarten and first grade. Then when we had my son, I transitioned out of the classroom. I worked for an educational nonprofit where we trained and we coached teachers. I did that for 3 years to help teachers with their reading curriculum. And then after that point, kind of towards the tail end of lockdown and the pandemic, I started Toddlers Can Read to help parents teach their own kids to read at home and kind of go around school and go around the nonprofit thing and all these kind of indirect routes of teaching kids and go directly to the person who I believe has the most control over their kids' education, which is helping the parent directly.
Absolutely. I want to get back to your classroom just at the beginning, but I want to ask a quick question. You recently spoke at South by Southwest EDU, and your talk was entitled "Let's Stop Talking About the Literacy Crisis."
That's right.
Um, why was that? Why did you want to talk about that? Because I think that's what a lot of people are here heard, that there is this literacy crisis.
Right. There's a tremendous literacy crisis. And the subject of the talk is really for folks who are already in the education world. So for folks coming in outside of the education world, if you're not familiar with this, there's a tremendous crisis. We have 2/3 of fourth graders reading below grade level. We have 1 in 5 adults in America who are functionally illiterate. I get messages from adults every single day asking me, an account named Toddlers Can Read, to help them as an adult learn how to read. They say, I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed, nobody in my life knows. I mean, the stuff that I read on a day in and day out basis is so, so, so sad. And if you're here, then you know someone in your life, whether it's a kid or whether it's an adult, who struggles with reading, and you've seen how it impacts them. Now, tremendous, tremendous crisis. Within the education world, what I see a lot of is people arguing and fighting about the best way to do this. It's not solutions for kids. It's not here's how we can help parents. It's I'm right, you're wrong. And there's a lot of bickering and arguing back and forth. So my message to educators is it's not enough to win an argument. It's not enough to put a comment on someone's post on social media. You have to actually count your wins as how many kids and how many families you've helped to support, not how many arguments you've won online or how many research articles you've read. So yes, there is a literacy crisis. It is a huge, huge issue. But unless you're actually doing the work to fix it, I'm not interested in all this theoretical conversation back and forth sort of thing, because ultimately when adults argue and when adults fight, kids lose.
Absolutely. Now let's back up to your starting out early in your career as a teacher, and you said to me that sometimes when you look back on the first couple of years, there you realize that things were great and you wish you could do a redo. What were some of the things that you might wish you could do in your first couple of years of teaching?
I think that a lot of teachers that I've spoken with, teachers who I've coached, and definitely my perception coming in, believe at the very beginning that teaching is about like passion. And it's something where like you love the kids, you build a good relationship, they love you back, and just like your enthusiasm, your excitement to make a difference in a kid's life is good enough. And then once you get into a classroom, you realize it's not good enough. Like anything else, it takes skill. We would never look at a doctor and say they're just so passionate about their patients, they're an incredible doctor. It's like, no, you need years and years and years of training. And for me and for many other folks who just kind of entered teaching with no previous experience, I had only 6 weeks of training. I made a lot of mistakes. I had a lot of lessons I had to learn really, really, really quickly. And so, yes, I look back on the first couple of years and I wish I could do them again, because I've gotten better since then. Just like after the last, 6 or 7 years being out of the classroom, I wish I could do the later years over because I've learned a lot since. And so my personal hope is that every year I'm looking back saying, okay, I know a lot more now. I've worked with more kids. I've got some more strategies, but I do think it's pretty common for teachers who are looking to grow and evolve and to do better to kind of look back and say, all right, I really struggled. What could I have done differently to have done a better job?
What were some of the challenges in reading and getting the children to read and teaching them to read during those times, early years?
The number one challenge is probably not a surprise. It's behavior management.
Mm.
You can use whatever term you want for this, but helping the kids to behave, to engage, to focus, to be excited. I had during my years anywhere from 24 to 28 kids in my class
Right.
for an extended day. It was a charter school day, so we had kids getting there really early and leaving really late. So it was really tiring for all of us. And so helping kids to focus and engage and pay attention was the biggest thing. But besides that, I used to teach a lot of the strategies that now I help to coach parents against. I used to teach kids to memorize sight words, and it seemed like they were learning really, really well, but they were just memorizing a word. They weren't learning the skill. I used to teach kids, through songs and through singing the ABC song, and it sounded like they knew all their letters, but then when I switched the order, they didn't actually know it. They had just memorized the song. And so there was both learning how to kind of manage a kid's behavior, which as a parent or grandparent at home, you've still got to know how to do.
Right.
You're still going to need to be able to sit down with your kid and help them focus. Then the other part of it is having the right teaching moves, knowing the steps to teaching kids how to read. And that's what I try to support parents with as well.
So pandemic happens and a lot of parents were at home with their children, the schools had closed, and a lot of them realized that their children aren't as proficient in reading as they thought they were.
Yep.
And during that time, you had your son, you were at home teaching your son how to read starting at 18 months, which I think is incredible. Tell us what have you heard from parents during that time, and why was that such a pivotal time in understanding the role of parenting or parent in this, as of reading?
Yeah, I'll be completely honest. I was like tunnel vision during the pandemic.
Okay.
I had no social media at all, no online presence. I wasn't looking at anything happening. It was me, my wife, my son. That was it. My job. So when I was teaching my son to read, it wasn't because I had a business. There was no business. It wasn't to post on social media. I had no social media. It was because I'm a former kindergarten teacher. My wife's a former kindergarten teacher. We knew that if kids come to kindergarten reading, it sets them up for all sorts of success. It's one less thing for the kid to have to worry about. It brings the pressure and the tension down. It helps them to access more books in the classroom. It helps them to understand their math. We just knew that would fundamentally set him up for success. So that's what I was doing. And that would have happened regardless of a pandemic or not. We had made that plan before he was born. We're going to see how early we can work with him. And hopefully we'll still keep it fun and keep it engaging. So this is something he looks forward to. But coming out of the pandemic, once I realized how valuable that skill was and the fact that it can be taught to parents, it doesn't have to be something that I have to tutor people on, or I have to work with people's kids, or I have to be like some kind of like private consultant for wealthy families. When I realized there's actually a business to just help parents do this on their own, that's when I got on social media and when I started interacting with people to realize that there's actually a ton of people who've learned during the pandemic their kids are behind. I wasn't cued into that in the moment, but once I kind of came back on and started getting messages from people, I realized that there had been kind of this awakening from parents where as teachers, we know the kids are behind, but the parents don't always know. And so I think some of that awareness, there's still a lot of parents who are in the dark, but some of that awareness is starting to come to the surface, I think, in the last couple of years.
What do you think is your your magic, I don't want to say magic. What is your what makes it your approach different? As a parent, I have purchased all kinds of reading materials, and followed other parents who told me their child was reading at 6 months, and I'm like, oh my God, my child must be behind, that kind of thing. And none of it really worked for. What do you think your appeal with parents is?
That's actually a tough question because sometimes I'm not sure what it is, but I can tell you this, with some of those other programs, the goal is to make you feel like your kid is behind, to make you want to like buy the product and start the thing. When I talk about the literacy crisis, that's not like a public conversation I have. I'm not out here spreading messages of fear, telling parents how far their kid is behind. I'm not talking about these stats and talking about summer slide. There's like the majority of the education world. The goal is to tell parents their kids are behind. My goal is none of that. It's to say, regardless of your kid's age, if at this point in your life you want to teach them how to read, I can help you. It's the same steps, it's the same process. So that's why we have parents of 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds who say, okay, this is the time I want to jump in. I can make it fun for you. We have parents of 7 and 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds who are doing the same exact steps because they've realized the kid is behind. No judgment from me. Whenever you want to get started, I can help. So I think part of this is it's not a program or an approach based on fear. It's just based on whatever the parent wants for their kid. And I'm happy to support. And I think the majority of reading programs, if we think of kind of two things, here's the reading instruction and here's the parental support, they focus here. But as a parent, I know there's a long list of things I wanted to teach my son that I didn't. And it's not that I didn't know how or wasn't competent or wasn't capable. There's a lot of stuff going on during the day. And to be able to make something a priority and to build it as a routine and to stick with it, it's challenging. And I think I can help parents feel motivated to get started. I can help them feel and see those wins along the way. And I can help them make time for this in their busy day, which is very, very unique. It has nothing to do with reading, but everything to do with just genuinely believing in parents. If you're a parent or a grandparent on this call, I genuinely believe in you. I mean, so much. I will never tell you you can't do it because you can, and I'll help you believe in yourself, even if you don't. So that's a big part of this program. The other part of it,
go ahead.
oh, sorry.
No,
Go ahead, Joy.
No, go ahead.
The other part of it is just super simple. Like reading isn't that complicated. So, you know, for people who are trying to get started, I've got my stuff with me today. Let's say that there's 26 letter sounds that you want to teach. Most people teach these all at once, and I will help you pick 2 or 3 at a time to focus on so your kid has some wins. Most people do like drill and kill. I'll help you find some fun games and fun activities. So it's completely customized to the kid. It's not do this day 1, do this day 2, do this day 3. But okay, your kid's a little bit younger. Let's show them a little bit less. Your kid's a little bit older. Let's show them a little bit more. Your kid likes to move. Let's come up with a game that gets them moving. Your kid wants to sit down at the table. Let's come up with something sitting down at the table. So it's both motivating, but it's also very, very flexible. And all of it is grounded in the fact that reading is a process of learning the sounds, combining them together into words, and then learning some of the more advanced sounds and some of the more advanced rules once we get those foundational pieces down.
You know, what I like about your approach is that, you know, as a parent, because I'm speaking as a journalist and as a parent, there's a level of insecurity that I think some of us have when it comes to teaching our children something as basic as reading, because we think that that's innate. We think we learn how to talk, we should be able to, you know, teach reading very easily. And I think having the tools to do that is very important. One thing that you mentioned to me in our interview is that you said that your child does not have to be a genius. And I think a lot of people think that their child is gifted and talented. Everybody thinks their kid is gifted and talented for, you know, but they think that their kid has to be gifted and talented to be reading at 2. Please talk about that.
I would love to. I think my kid is gifted and talented at nothing. You know, like I think that's the approach that you've got to take as a parent, because that mindset is so problematic. It says you can only be good at things if you're born good at them. Right. And the vast majority of things in life are not things we're born with. Your ability to be in a positive relationship, your ability to manage your money, your ability to manage your stress and exercise and eat, and all these things that are part of life, you're not born with them. Intelligence isn't something that's like fixed at birth. It's something that you learn and you develop. And so the most important thing for my son isn't that he's a really great reader. It's that he understands in life, if you want to be good at something, you've got to work for it really, really hard. That's what I want to teach him. And so I want people to get rid of this idea of it's gifted and talented kids who are doing this. It's not. It's parents who've decided that reading is important to their kid, who've made 5 minutes a day to teach, and they've stuck with it. It's parents who look across the day. They look at their screen time. They look at their behavior management. They look at their conversations with their partner to norm on the same page. They look at the structure of the day. They look at the routine. They're being super intentional whose kids are making these strides. So it has nothing to do with how your kid is born or them being special. I can assure you my kid wasn't. It has everything to do with you as the parent deciding this is important and helping your kid to understand if we work at this, we're going to get better. And yes, it will be easier for some kids to learn. It will be harder for some kids to learn. But ultimately, as the parent, you can't control that. You have no control over whether it's going to be easier or harder. Ultimately, your kid needs to learn how to read anyways. So to me, let's kind of get rid of the notion and let's just focus on, okay, here's where my kid is at now. Here's the next step I need them to take. And here's the most effective way to teach it to them.
You've won many accolades for your teaching abilities and in the classroom. Teachers of the Year, I believe the Kinder ki- uh, Teachers of Excellence Award,
Yep.
Prize of $20,000. What does it mean to be recognized for your teaching skills? Oh,
I really appreciated it. Yeah, I'm trying to think through it because you want to be like, it's all for the kids, it's all for the families, which the kids and the families were such a tremendous part of my life. You know, it's the reason why when we had our kid, I had to leave the classroom because the level I was committing from living in the neighborhood to doing home visits for every kid and having back to school parties at my house and the workshops. I mean, it was everything. I've no family in Houston. So my families became my students' families, you know, and I poured so much into it. But there is very little recognition for teachers. And, you know, it's kind of timely because it's Teacher Appreciation Week. Very little recognition. So for someone to look at my class and say, based on your test scores, yes, their test scores were crazy, but also based on your culture, based on the love and the joy and the energy in this classroom, we appreciate you, and we're going to give you this $3,500, this $10,000, this $20,000 teaching award. I mean, that's how I paid off my college loan. That's how I put the down payment on my first house to move into the neighborhood with my kids. It was very significant.
Let's talk about your approach. I know you talk about the sounds and teaching kids the sounds, and so you incorporate phonics obviously into your approach. You know, talk about a little bit about how how you incorporate phonics and decoding and those kind of techniques.
Yep, happy to. Let's use like a super basic example of a word here. Joy, maybe you can tell me if this is showing up forwards or backwards.
It's correct.
Okay. So if we want to teach a kid this word, and actually this might be a better word because this is one of the first words people teach is like the word cat. You've got a couple of choices. What most folks do is they'll put a picture of a cat above this. They'll put the word cat and they'll tell the kid, what does this word say? And eventually the kid learns the word says cat. If you look at their eyes, they're not looking at the letters, they're looking at the picture. And so they're starting to learn, oh, I look at the pictures and that tells me what the word is. The problem is most words don't have pictures, especially the older you get. And so that strategy doesn't work for these words. The second strategy people usually go to is let's teach the kid to memorize this word. Because when I read as an adult, I've memorized the words. I just look at them and I know them. So my kid needs to learn to just look at it and know it. This is where, you know, the Your Baby Can Read program and all these old programs that existed would send you hundreds of flashcards and they color code them. And, you know, you flash cat and put it down, and flash dog, put it down, flash mom and put it down. And eventually you see these videos of little kids online with flashcards and you're cycling through them and the kids spitting the word out right away. Looks like they're reading, they're not. They memorized the word. What I wager, and what the science of reading supports, and all these sort of meta-analyses that have looked at how the brain learns to read, there's scans on this, there's evidence of this, there's classroom observations, is instead of having kids memorize whole words, we want kids to learn the sounds in those words. So instead of having them memorize like a whole word, I can have them learn this sound says eh. Eh is the sound that this makes. And as the parent, we need to work on our pronunciation, make sure we know, but once we know, we teach it to the kid. Once the kid knows sounds, so let's say they know the sounds eh, t, we can have them start looking at words and start to blend them. Eh, t, pet, pet. And that's the foundational part of reading. We learn more and more sounds. So we eventually learn that if I put an E at the end, that E will change that E sound. And it'll make the E say its name. It'll make it say E. So we start to learn this as Pete. We learn to read longer and longer words. So I can put an S at the end and I can still blend all the way through. But that's what phonics and phonemic awareness is. Phonics is knowing the sounds. Phonemic awareness is being able to combine them together. And if we teach our kids those two things, they're going to be able to read almost any word they see. Eventually, we start to teach more and more advanced sounds. So as an example, right, we might move past like a single letter towards like a double letter. And we learn AY says A, like it's say or way or day or play. And we move to longer and longer words, like 2-syllable or 3-syllable words, but it's all the same. It's, do we know the sounds? Can we put them together? Okay, let's start reading. And if we do that over and over and over again, that's when those words start to become automatic for kids.
Is it the same approach for adults? You say you've been contacted by a number of adults who are really struggling. Mhm.
It is. It's the same steps to learn to read regardless of your age. There's been a couple questions about age. Age doesn't matter. If your kid is 2, if they're 4, if they're 6, if they're 40. I got a message last week from someone in New York who's teaching their neighbor to read, and their neighbor is 72. And they're in my first course. They're watching the videos, and their neighbor has learned 23 of her 26 sounds, and she has a vision of being able to read her Bible, right? She's learning the same way. She's feeling the same progress as a toddler would. She's just never been taught. So it's the exact same. The reason I can't support adults yet is because I teach the teacher. All of my videos are to the parent. So if there's an adult in their life that can help them, then the approach works the same. But ultimately, what we need for the reading community is we need an app similar to Babbel or Duolingo or something that adults can download, and they're going to be taught directly themselves, where they can do it in the comfort of their own home, and someone's just saying, hey, A and Y together says A. Let's practice some words with that.
Have you had any pushback from parents, or maybe the question is, what is the biggest challenge for parents in doing it this way?
I think for parents, the challenge is not the instructional method that I'm showing, because the instructional method is relatively simple. The hardest part instructionally is getting your kid to be able to blend the words. So parents will look at this word, I'll put the word pet back, and the kid will go et, 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 and the parent's having trouble getting the kid to combine it. And the answer is, the word's too long, let's start with 2 sounds. And let's slowly guide them through 2. And once they can do 2, then let's do 3. Once they can do 3, then let's do 4. So blending is instructionally the hardest part of this. But in reality, the toughest part for most people is getting started. It's thinking this is going to take a lot of time, which it doesn't. Max 5 minutes a day to start, most likely 2 minutes. It's thinking they've got to be a great reader themselves. They don't. I've struggled with reading most of my life. You don't have to be a great reader to teach reading. You just have to know the basics. You know, it's all these doubts and insecurities, and maybe it's too soon, or maybe it's too late. I don't have time. I don't have energy. I'm going to be bad. You know, I can't teach. I'm not a good reader. All that stuff is the stuff that parents deal with day in and day out that prevents them from getting started. But more times than not, once they actually do it and they see how much the kid likes it, then it's easier for them to actually stick with it and continue to do the lessons every day.
There's a constant message that I see. I see it when I go to the pediatrician. I see it at libraries. Read to your child 20 minutes a day. Read to your child 20 minutes a day. Will help them read. Do you believe that?
I've lived that, and it did not help me to read.
Yeah.
So, you know, for all of the books my mom read to me from 0 to 6, for all of the series I loved, and the time just cuddling up on her lap and being read to, I was still one of the 2 worst readers in my first grade class, because you can't learn how to decode the letters on the page if you're not looking at and being taught what those letters on the page mean. Like, how in the world are you going to learn that this says this says F and that says T because your parent reads you books at night? Like, it doesn't connect. And so what I want people to hear clearly is you absolutely should be reading books to your kids. I hear sometimes people aren't reading to their kids. And to me, that's actually a big issue because books open up our background knowledge and our schema of the world around us. There's only so much we get in the four walls of our homes. We have to get information from outside. And even if your kid learns to read really, really well, if they don't have the background knowledge from being read to, their comprehension is very likely going to be lower because background knowledge is one of the biggest indicators of comprehension. It has to do with oral language skills. It has to do with your relationship with your kid, a special memory they can look back on. I mean, you should be reading to your kid, and I will say that emphatically. But you also need to understand that reading to your kid is about as effective in teaching them to read as driving them to the store is effective in teaching them how to drive, right? Like, we know that driving is a skill that needs to be taught. Maybe your kid enjoys the car trip. Maybe they're learning like what it feels like to be in a car, but until you put them at the steering wheel, you teach them how to spin it and how to push the pedals and where to look and all that sort of stuff. They don't have the code they need to be able to crack that car, right? Like, they can't figure it out. They're just gonna sit there and crash. Same thing happens. We can read to our kids all day, and it's going to build love and joy and excitement and background knowledge. But we need both. They need all of that, and they need to know the code so they can figure out what the letters on the page mean.
And I am a testament to that because I am a big reader. I grew up with tons of children's books, and so my children have. We do nothing but look at children's books, read children's books. We have tons of them, and I thought that that would help with reading, and I realized during the pandemic that it wasn't. So this has been a learning lesson for me too, with all the parents that follow you as well. What do you want parents to take away, grandparents to take away today when we're talking about this? What would you like them to know that we haven't discussed?
For me, the biggest takeaway I want folks to walk away from, period, anytime you interact with me or my page or my resources, yes, teaching your kid to read is incredibly important. No, you don't have to be the one to do it. For some folks, school's going to do just fine for your kid. And if it doesn't, you've got the money, you've got the resources for tutors and for intervention and for all that sort of stuff. Some people don't even believe in like early education, period. They think it's developmentally inappropriate. It's not helpful, blah, blah, blah. People have their opinions. I'm not here to change anyone's mind. My point is, if you decide you want to teach your kid to read or you want to teach your grandkid to read, and if you decide it's important to you, it's a lot easier to do than you think. It takes a lot less time. It takes a lot less background knowledge. It takes a lot less skill. And simply getting started with a couple minutes a day is all you need to be able to make really, really big differences. Something we haven't touched on is the advantage of the parent or caregiver over the school. And as a former teacher, I'll tell you, it was easier to teach my kid at 18 months than it was to teach 25 6-year-olds. Like, that's different. It is so hard to get one-on-one time, even to get small group time as a teacher in a classroom. And you've got all this other stuff going on. You've got the schedule and you've got the day. I mean, it is challenging even for the best teachers to give kids the specific time and attention they need. But as the parent, and again, I'm not saying it is easy because I know how many things parents are juggling. There's a lot going on in your life, but as a parent, it is often easier to get 5 minutes one-on-one than it is for your kid's teacher. And so there's a distinct advantage to being able to target just what your kid needs. Imagine that you're able to teach your kid these 3 sounds. I'm just picking 3 sounds randomly, like ah, and up this week. And you're able to teach them 3 more next week and 3 more next week and 3 more next week. Your kid is going to have learned 12 sounds that month. They'll be done with all of their sounds in essentially 2 months, and they'll be moving on to the next stage of reading. Compare that with a classroom where, because kids are all at different points and different stages, we might have to do a letter of the week where we don't move on from this letter until the end of the week. We might do a letter of the day where your kid never actually learns any of the letters because now it's going too fast. We might have to do in every letter every day. We show the whole class every single letter during calendar time, and we hope by the end of the year it sinks in. But we're not able as teachers to differentiate as well as a parent can. And this is really, really important. Teachers can't find your kid's exact interest and skill level and build a custom activity for every single kid. We do our best, but it's so, so hard. So as parent, caregiver, grandparent, you've got a lot of things working in your favor. And I think a lot of people on the internet tell you everything's working against you. They tell you you don't have enough time, you don't have enough energy, you don't have enough skill, it's so hard. I'm not discounting any of that stuff. All I'm saying is you can do it if you want to, and it can be a lot better, a lot easier, a lot more fun than you think.
Last question before we open it up to questions. There are a lot of children who are struggling with learning differences, dyslexia, things like that. How does that factor into your program, and what do you tell people who have children who might be in that space?
I think it's actually everything I just said in that previous answer about being able to work exactly at your kid's level.
Mhm.
Dyslexia means different things to different kids. So depending on your kid's age, depending on the severity, depending on the letters they're flipping or the struggles they're having, when you work with them one-on-one, you'll be able to find, and whether this is dyslexia or autism or ADHD, whether it's age-related, confidence-related, your goal is to find the thing your kid needs and teach that. Teach that. If I'm working with a kid, dyslexia or not, I'm not stopping until I've got 3 things to teach them. I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna assess them. I worked with an older child, a 4th grader last week, and she struggled with her reading. And so my goal when I sat down with her was to figure out exactly what the challenge was. She said, I've got dyslexia, reading's really hard, I don't like when I get called on in school. And to me, I hear it and I say, okay, let me get specific. And what I found out was there's a whole list of advanced sounds that she doesn't know. So now I can teach 3 of them at a time. Every week we can make some progress, and we can start to build on that and start to have her making some progress. But that same kid with dyslexia in school, it's gonna be really tough for her to get that sort of targeted support because she's one of many, many kids. The class has likely already moved on past that phonics level, and now we're expected to be reading in our head and comprehending, but obviously we're missing these foundational skills. So if your kid has some sort of learning challenge, behavioral challenge, any sort of challenge, the advice is teach them one-on-one, because you can target that thing they're missing much more effectively than if you have, the best curriculum or the best program in the world, but now they're 1 in 10 or 1 in 20.
I want to make sure everybody knows that Russell does not do tutoring of children. He helps the parents. So that 4th grader, he was doing an assessment, but her parent was probably there, and he was coaching her how to help her.
Yeah, and
right?
and recording it. If you look at my videos with the kids, those are the kids who come over, recording it to show you at home what to do. If your kid is doing this, if they're older and they're struggling, here's how to help them. So, there's people who listen and say, okay, this sounds great, let's have you teach my kid. I can't make the impact I need to make in the world working one-on-one with your kid. I'm sorry, it's just not gonna happen. We wouldn't have 99 people on the webinar right now if I'm tutoring, wealthy parents' kids one-on-one.
Right.
You need to see, here's what it looks like with the kid, so that you can do it with your kid at home. And again, if that's not your cup of tea, all good, no worries. It's not everyone's thing, but for a lot of parents, they're hungry and they're excited to be able to teach their kid to read. They just need the tools and the strategies to be able to follow through. And that's what I'm hoping that I'm providing for folks.
Okay, Jennifer, I think we're ready for a few questions.
That's fantastic. So I just want to, seeing so many questions about, will a recording of this event be made available? Yes, we will be publishing a recording of this full event on our YouTube page. We'll send it to you in a post-event survey to a link there as well, and it should appear within 24 hours. And of course, you can always find Spencer on his Instagram page, his TikTok page at Toddlers Can Read. So, but with that, let's go ahead. There was an interesting question that came in, and it kind of goes a little bit off of your last question about like kids who are just having a little harder time reading. like, besides that one-on-one individual, attention from their parent, are there any other resources that you might want to say to look into if they suspect that there may be a learning disability, if they're just having a hard time? Is there anything else that they should keep in mind as a resource?
I would work with their school. You know, this should be something where if you suspect your kid has a learning disability, contact the school, work with the school, try to get them tested, get some additional accommodations for your kids so they have more time when they take tests and those sorts of things. Actually met with, not met with, but I heard a sixth grader at my son's Taekwondo class talking about her upcoming STAR testing, how she's dyslexic and she's dreading it because she can't read the stuff in time, but her parents never went through the process with the school to get her accommodations. So she's going into a test that she should have extra time to read, but she doesn't. And so my starting place would be, because I get these questions a lot, contact your school, use the existing resources at your disposal, and try and make a plan with your kid's teacher. I'm assuming we're in school, we're at that grade level, because if we're under 5, then I'm not really reading too far into their reading struggles. But if your kid's a little older and they're struggling, I would try to contact and work with the school to figure out how to get your kid more support.
That's great. Here's another question, is that developmentally, speech-wise, children may learn to pronounce or articulate different sounds at a later time. So what advice, just like, for example, at 3 or 4 years of age, they're unable to pronounce an S sound correctly, etc. So what advice do you give to parents or grandparents who may not understand their toddler because they're not able to pronounce the sounds correctly?
For sure. I would start, first off, I'll say, you don't need to teach them. And if you want to, I would start with the sounds that are easier for them to pronounce. There's actually a whole list of things that makes a certain sound easier. Being able to pronounce the sound is at the top of that list. But, there's sounds, for example, V, where the sound V is contained in the name V. That is generally an easier sounds where the two symbols look similar, than a sound like H, where the two symbols look different, and the H, the name does not have the in it. So there's kind of a list. We can rank sounds from easiest to hardest generally, but I would say start with the sounds your kid can say. There's some that are going to be easier. S is a little bit trickier. And then if you get to the point where they've learned all the sounds they can say, and you've got a couple sounds left that they can't pronounce, you can still teach it to them. You can accept their approximation as correct. This is what I did with my son, because he couldn't say all the sounds. I knew his brain was registering it. I knew the approximation sounded the same every time. So I knew he was correctly getting it and that his speech would catch up eventually. The thing I changed was when we moved on to blending, I just wasn't writing those sounds down in the words he was reading. I was having him read these short words with the sounds that were easier for him to say.
I have something funny. I just want to say this. My son struggles with the TH. And so, which is, I think it's probably hard, right? And he's always doing this weird thing with his tongue because he can't figure out how to use his tongue in TH. And so that's one thing I need to learn how to teach him how to do.
It's a terrible sound. There's 2 sounds for TH, to which the hard part. There's and one is voiced, the second one, so you can feel the vibration, and the first one is unvoiced. And so sometimes kids can say one but not the other. They flip it, it's very hard to pronounce, and a lot of S's convert to TH. So, in that case, we accept the best approximation. If we're really worried about it, we consult a speech language pathologist who can help us with more resources. But yeah, a TH is a big one.
Going a little bit back to the program that itself, we're getting some questions, just curious what kind of curriculum you kind of used or research you kind of used to create it. How did you go about just creating that Toddlers Can Read program?
For sure. Lots of questions on this. The research on how kids learn to read is kind of like curriculum and program agnostic. There's a set of things that we know kids need, such as phonics, phonemic awareness, advanced letter sound recognition, There's a set of rules kids need to know to be able to decode certain words, like that E that I showed you at the end, understanding how those letters fit together. So those principles have nothing to do with a specific program or curriculum. It's just, this is how kids learn to read. Now, what I do is I've bought a ton of programs in curriculum, a ton of them. There's a number of homeschool reading curriculum programs. There's a number of programs used in schools. There's a number of programs targeted directly to parents. And I've looked at the programs and I've tried to find the strengths. I've tried to find the weaknesses. I've tried to see how parents use those and adjust them to kind of the day-to-day life and reality of a parent to make it easy. So we've got to kind of balance, here's what we know from research and here's what we know in practice. So when I'm coming up with the program, and, this is where people get a little bit uncomfortable if, we're like, what's the research behind 3 sounds at a time? Well, when you try to teach the kid everything, they don't learn anything. So the research is doing this with hundreds of kids and moving kids months and years faster than anybody else has. That's the research. The research is tens of thousands of parents following this, doing it, and having incredible results. And so a lot of this is just like basic knowledge. We understand this. It's not groundbreaking. It's not revolutionary. It's not me inventing something new. The fact that no one else was doing this before me still blows my mind because it's such an incredible need. What I do with the program is I help parents find the right number of sounds to pick. So let's start with 3, and if we don't learn 3 in a week, let's go to 2. Let's start with 3, and if it takes us 3 days, let's go up to 4 or 5. I help parents find the game or activity. I say, here's 50 fun ways to do this. Which one works for your kid? Here's games outside. Here's games for active kids. Here's games with toys. I help them find that right activity. And then I help them learn and kind of understand blending. And if you really want to get into the nitty gritty, there's continuous blending and successive blending and all these different kind of technical terms for how we teach kids to blend. The literature is actually super weak from my perspective in terms of how different curriculum and tools teach blending. So what I try to do is give parents a really clear framework of, we're going to move from 2 to 3 to 4. Here's how we're going to chunk and guide them through. And here's the teacher moves I want you to use in that process. So I don't know if that answers or doesn't answer, but to me, the questions begin to flirt with this message that I'm giving to educators, which is, yes, we want to get the technical stuff correct. And also, we want to look at what's actually working, what's actually moving kids in real life, and we've got to be able to balance both. And sometimes we get so stuck up on, oh, it's not, step by step, line by line, this exact approach with this exact study. It's like, yeah, but that wasn't built for a busy mom with 3 kids who doesn't feel confident in her ability to teach her kid to read. So we've got to be able to bridge that gap for parents to help them understand this is a good, effective, solid way to teach your kid to read. It might not be the optimal lesson plan, let's be honest, that I would give to a 20-year veteran seasoned teacher. I'm having a completely different conversation with them. I've coached them. That's a different conversation. But no teaching experience. You've got a 3-year-old, you want to teach them to read, or an 8-year-old who's behind. I know what that parent needs to feel successful and to get their kid reading.
That's great. Switching gears a little bit, I know we've talked a lot about educators and supporting them in the classroom. How can we? What do you think the normal average person can do to support schools, teachers, and the state of education in our world today? And Joy, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think you're also included in this question as well.
Do you want it?
No, you go right ahead.
It's a tough one. I think as a teacher, what I've always appreciated is kids who come in prepared, not just academically, behaviorally, socially. You've got to look at the whole picture of your kid, and every kid has strengths and weaknesses, and looking at those weaknesses in your kid and trying to build them before they get to school. For some kids, it's following directions. For some kids, it's keeping their section neat and organized. For some kids, it's reading or math. But looking at your kid and helping to prepare them to be successful, whatever that means for your kid, I think that's one way we can support schools and systems. I think another way is the ongoing dialogue and relationship with the teacher, and being the kind of parent who is willing to reach out, to check in, to set meetings, to stay updated. but there's a level of humility that comes with it too, where the relationship is a little bit of a give and take. And it can't always be, I'm their parent, I know best. Sometimes it's, you're their teacher, you know best. And finding what that line is in the relationship, I think, is another way to support teachers. I don't have an amazing answer for the system at large. I try to think about, what's my control as a parent with my kid's teacher so that she feels supported.
And I'll just say, as a parent, I totally agree. One of the things I have found is just staying in contact with the teacher. And I had a call with one of my children's teachers last week, and I said, I'm sorry, I'm being, a pain. And she says, you're not being a pain, you're being a parent. And and we have a really good relationship, even though I'm not always in agreement with how things go in the classroom. I let her know that I'm here to support what she's learning, what my daughter is learning in the classroom, so that she can, succeed and have a chance of really excelling and building her confidence too. So I think, it's easy to point the finger at teachers. We put a lot on teachers, and I think we expect them to move heaven and earth and produce geniuses, and we point the finger when they are not gifted and talented. But I think I agree. I so agree with Spencer in that having that relationship with the teacher where you trust them and they trust you, and you're there for the child, is so important.
That's great. I think we have time for maybe just one or two more questions. This one came in through email. The person who's writing in says that they are a parent of a preschooler looking to enroll them in kindergarten this fall, and there are so many choices, so many more choices than I had when I was a kid. You say they know how to read, say they're set up for success the best way that I can set them up as a parent. What would you say as far as public versus private versus charter versus what? Can you weigh in on that in any way? And Joy, this
Ooh,
is for you
good
too.
one.
So
That's a good one. I like this question.
You like it enough to go first?
Okay, I'll try to go first this time. I think, as someone put in the comments, every child learns differently. And I think you have to find what works best for your child. I have one child who is more of an introvert and needs a smaller classroom, and has been just doing the most in a classroom of 26 kids and one teacher. I have another child who's very outgoing and is very social and is able to self-regulate and everything in a large classroom. So I have to make some decisions come the next semester. What am I going to do? I can't leave them in the same school environment and expect them both to thrive. So I think that's what I have learned, is that, not every school is not the best school for every child, even if you have children in the same school. Does that make sense? Yeah.
For sure. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll start with the idea that not everybody has school choice.
That's true.
And for some folks, it's going to be your kid goes to whatever school you're zoned to, whatever school you can make it to. And it is what it is.
Right.
It's either that or it's homeschool, and not everybody has the option to homeschool. So, for the folks for whom, I think this is like school choice is a little bit of a blessing and a curse.
Right.
It's a blessing in that you have options, and a little bit of a curse in that it's really tough to pick the school for your kid. I had no idea how hard this was until I had my own, had to go through the process. Mm-hmm. And man, emotionally draining, trying to find the right place for your kid. To me, I went through this process based on like feel. And I toured as many schools as I could, public and private, try to note how I feel in the building and how I feel like my son would fit based on his personality. And I would say, if you're in the privilege to be able to tour schools and to visit them, try and imagine your kid in that situation and how they would interact and how they'd move and how they'd feel. And there were certain schools I got a really negative feeling from. And maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. I don't know. All I know is I'm going to trust it. And that school's on the no list. In certain schools, I felt very positive. And so I was just trying to listen to my intuition. It's not exact science, you know, there's other things I tallied, like how often the kids were on screens, which to me was important. It was minimal. How aware did the teacher seem of the kids? You know, like were kids running crazy, or did it seem like they were monitored and safe? Like all that stuff. But it is not always fun to be in that position. I've been in it, and I've tried to lean into my intuition of just how do I feel when I'm at the school, and do I think this would be a good fit for my kid?
I have one thing because you brought up the screens, and I know that you did a video on this. So, and it's pretty controversial here about screen usage. Tell everybody here, what are your thoughts?
This should not be controversial, but it is controversial because screens are one of those things that is so hard for us to give up that we want to fight tooth and nail to keep it. And my opinion is very, very simple. If you look at your kid, first, let's start with the premise that you have a vision of who you want your kid to be in life. You have some kind of sense of the opportunities you want to be available for your kid, the kind of person you want them to be. You want them to be happy and healthy and safe and social and outgoing, whatever those things are. If you look at your kid and they're not on a path to that vision, they don't socialize with others. They don't interact and engage with you. They don't focus during a lesson. They're shut down. The mood is dysregulated. They're having tantrums and meltdowns. Like if you look at your kid and something is off, and then you look at their screen usage and it's really high, try to do less. I mean that like that's pretty much what it is. I've had at this point hundreds of people tell me I took the screens away from my kid. It was tough for a week. Now their behavior is completely different. I've taught kids who are on screens a ton. They come to school, we have research on this, with symptoms mimicking depression, mimicking ADHD. In 5 and 6-year-olds, screens are not good for me. I track the minutes I am on my phone every single day. I can tell you yesterday I was on my phone 123 minutes. It's a high day. My average is supposed to be below 100. Last week it was 88. I track this because my phone use correlates with my mood and my energy. When I'm on my phone more, I feel depressed, I get less done. As adults, screens are bad for us. Being on this Zoom and on email all day is bad for me. There's no debate about it. This is not good for me. So if I subjected a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old to that level of screens, there's going to be an impact on them, and it's going to be something that pulls them further from my vision. So the answer is not 0 screen time, although for some kids it is. The answer is look at your kid, look at where you want them to be, and if they're struggling, if they're melting down, if you're struggling with them as the parent, try taking that really tough step of pulling some of the screens back and just see if it impacts their behavior. If it doesn't, throw them back in. But I've never met a parent that said it didn't impact and it didn't help. And oftentimes taking that screen away actually gives the parent more energy and more focus, because the kid's now more focused to be able to manage that new non-screen time.
That's fantastic. Well, to curb your screen time a little more for the duration of the Zoom, I thank you so much for joining us today, Spencer. It's a delight. Everyone, you'll get a recording of this up on YouTube after. If you can take the survey, that'd be great. And you can find Spencer at Toddlers Can Read on Instagram. Thanks so much again for your time. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate
Wonderful.
it. Thank you,
Thanks,
Spencer.
Elle.
It's been a pleasure.
Of course, thank you.
All right, bye.